Good afternoon. This is David Weiss, professor at New Jersey City University, speaking on behalf of the Connecting Bridges and Borders Spotify and podcast programming under the IDR, or Institute for Dispute Resolution umbrella. Today, we have a great and exciting discussion with a young man, Zachary Witman, from GrowSquares, and it will be focused on our innovation and entrepreneurship sector. And Zachary recently won a pitch competition that was held by the New Jersey Tech Council in our state for 2020. And his company is really into something very innovative, dealing with agriculture and really the environment and utilizing some methodologies around AI. Zachary, I want to welcome you to the show today. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me, David.
So, can you give us a little background on you, Zachary, and of course then on GrowSquares?
Yeah, would love to. So GrowSquares is a simple, easy to use gardening solution. What we've done is we've taken a considerable amount of time to understand environments for our users. Users are people like you and me, growing gardens on their rooftops and their balconies and their backyards throughout throughout major metropolitan cities in the country, as well as in suburbs and in the countryside. What we've done is we've utilized something called remote sensing technology. So these are things that measure one individual's sunlight or wind, all these sort of discrete instruments. And then we've taken a lot of time, a lot of data science, algorithm design, to really simplify that for the purposes exclusive of understanding one space, what's the best plant to grow for your space, and how to do it. And so we've developed a series of they're essentially garden toppers. They're these simplified garden modules that contain everything one needs to grow one particular plant in their space, and then an app to tell you how to do it. So when to water and how much. We track the weather, we track the migration patterns and the biology of the underlying plant. Really just make a simple kind of paint by number solution for people who want to grow vegetable, herbs and fruit in their backyard. My background comes a little bit different. So I'm from mostly from finance. I was at Carnegie Mellon and MIT. And then I got into, besides banking, the hedge fund world, where what we used is a lot of these same type of technologies, things that people like photovoltaic installers use to understand how much sunlight might be hitting their arrays over the course of any one day. Automated cars that have a better understanding of what their environment might look like for obstacle avoidance. We've really piggybacked on a lot of these technologies, but made it for a different application for gardens. And so, I've got that, a little bit different of a background, but applying a lot of those same types of facilities to gardening. I brought on a few people into our team, including biologists, data scientists, all to create this simple and elegant solution that our users thus far really enjoy. And we're going national pretty soon.
Well, that's exciting information. And obviously the growth next stage of your company is also really fascinating. You use a really important word about simplification. So can you, for our audience, give some sort of message or tone of what the simplification is and the process, and maybe also just amplify a little bit of how the outcomes of this will be positive in terms of both carbon footprint reduction, the environment, and maybe even public health?
It's a great question. And I think what it does is it touches upon a lot of the sort of positive externalities of just what gardening and food production on a localized and personalized environment does. So when we talk about simplification, right now, people that want to grow their own food, there's a lot of obstacles in their way, right? So right now, we call it the customer journey. Oftentimes people have to go to Home Depot or to Lowe's or one of these types of large big box stores. They come in with imperfect information as to what grows in their space. They don't know their soil. Even among expert gardeners, about 90% of people don't even know what grows best in their environment. So what we've done is we've simplified this whole process, not only giving them information as to what grows and how it grows, but also creating a customized soil solution and nutrient solution based upon the deficiencies of their local area. So, if you were to go ahead and ask people, hey, would you do a taxonomy assessment of your backyard? Would you identify what are the types of nutrients and bacteria that might be deficient or missing for your space? The answer for almost almost everyone who's not growing huge amounts of food would be no. What we've done is we've front loaded all of that complexity so that anyone who wants to garden has all of these types of solutions at their disposal. So what we've done is we've really simplified some of the kind of inherent complexity in gardening by taking on the difficult part in the kind of the back rooms of our data process units and our data architecture and logic. So that's really kind of what we've done. In terms of some of the positive contributions that gardening will confer. One is, as you mentioned, is carbon sequestration. So today, we find things like transporting 1 pound of asparagus from traditional manufacturers, so that's going to either be in South America or the Midwest. It's about 30 pounds of carbon just to get that 1 pound of asparagus into your local mega mart. That's a tremendous footprint just for 1 pound of asparagus. We find that there's a lot of other food who come from very far away. And so what we've done is by replacing that source, by having you eat local, you replace it sometimes the second or third largest contributor of one person, person's carbon footprint just by that production or that migration of food from their backyard, or sorry, from big farms to their backyard. So it's a huge, huge reduction in one's carbon footprint, more so than cutting out your carbon usage for things like transportation. It's a big kind of source for it. In terms of another thing, we qualify it as evapotranspiration rate. What that means is the amount of water vapor in one's environment. We don't really oftentimes think about water vapor, but it's a huge indicator to the amount of heat an area will have. So by growing your own garden, we find that temperatures around the surrounding area fall precipitously. And the amount of kind of ambient temperature we can find have tremendous impacts. So there's a whole bunch of things that growing your own garden can confer, kind of positive externalities that aren't necessarily just more nutritious, organic, and non-GMO vegetables.
This really is exciting stuff because it sounds like if we are looking at the carbon footprint at a macro level discussion beyond just the consumer, it sounds like from a city planning, state planning, regional planning, if on a aggregate level, they're wanting to look at ways or methodologies or new innovative models that can reduce carbon footprint. This is an application that can assist in that process. Is that correct?
That is.
How do you envision some of that process to work?
So what we've done is we've done a lot of analysis on exactly the contributions for each plant within our portfolio. So right now we grow about 112 different types of herbs, vegetables, and fruits. And our system is able to identify the natural climate that you're growing in on a high resolution basis. So that's down to 1 square foot. And then based upon what your yield amount might be, we're actually able to figure out what that carbon coefficient is, both in terms of biomass sequestration, so carbon sequestration, as well as what the alternative would be if you were to just kind of go to your local supermarket and produce. So what we do is when we, for our user, you will see what their net savings are in terms of your carbon footprint. And then we're able to essentially just add up all of our users. So you as a user, you get to see what your personal impact is by migrating to our platform. But what we as a company can do is we can see where trends might be, right? How much your local neighborhood is saving if you migrate to a platform like ours. It really becomes power through data. And so the more users that our system has, not only does our kind of total contributions increase, but we're able to see how these trends migrate, where there might be sort of deficiencies, sort of patterns into food consumption. Those are things that are super valuable, not just for our product, but up the food chain in terms of what are the types of foods that should be growing, especially if you're trying to optimize that for plants that are less harmful on the environment.
Well, it sounds that John Steinbeck, when he wrote Grapes of Wrath, could have had a different version and outcome of the Dust Bowl had you been around.
That's something to think about. I'd never thought of a Steinbeck implication, but it's a good one to be linked to.
So, for purposes of the consumer, how can they? What would be one word or one phrase that would be a great takeaway to remember from a lot of the intellectual capacity of what you've built here? What would be a great phrase or something that would be to remember you and your company by?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot here, David. I think that for a singular phrase, we like to really position ourselves as the intersection of technology and microbiology. So that's what GrowSquare's whole kind of ethos is using core technology to improve one person's products through things like microbiology. So I'm going to say, yeah, that's probably a good takeaway.
And if we're looking at the prism of our great garden state of New Jersey, how do you see, from a city planner and right down to the consumer level, where do you see opportunities for your company to partner and collaborate with? And, are there different unique cities that you think could really benefit from something like this?
Yeah. So, while we think that these products applied can be beneficial to anywhere that there might be users and an interest in growing one's own garden, our big focus these days is on the production. So not only do we have an app and all the kind of commiserate data science that goes into it, but producing these squares, both the cellulistic kind of things that we impregnate them with, the raw materials, the nutrients, the bacteria, all of these things need to be assembled in one individual spot. And so what we've been doing is we've been focusing our efforts on places like Jersey City, where there's an existing manufacturing base, large plots of land, a knowledgeable workforce that can really kind of put together our physical product. Because at the end of the day, while our app can be fantastic, it speaks to something that one can pick up and touch. And so manufacturing that, we believe, in places like Jersey City would be absolutely fantastic. And it's a lot closer to the consumer than having this just done in a warehouse in the middle of North Dakota or Bakersfield, California, these other locations.
Yeah, I think you're onto something, because not only from the environmental perspectives as well as public health that you've already eloquently yourself indicated, from a perspective of quality of life in general, the more that there's an aggregator of this, the more improvement there will be to quality of life in a city like Jersey City or other cities, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of companies struggle to have production that is close to the consumer. I mean, there's inherent things that are improved by having that consumer close to that manufacturing. You see it in a lot of other industries. We're in agriculture. There's a huge movement to rooftop farming, to indoor farming. We are an outdoor solution, but the same logic applies. If you can be close to your customer base, it's better for everyone involved. Lead times, seasonal impacts, all of these things are really kind of captured if the two things are close. Especially considering we like to capture just what our carbon impact might be, and so ensuring that the proximity to what a user might be and where the means of production are always things we're trying to optimize.
Yeah, I see your point, because especially with cities, there's so much CO that's emitted from different industries and sectors that use certain processes, this is something that would help to mitigate and reduce some of these negative impacts we have for quality of life that many planning boards, city planners, regional planners, and up the chain, if you will, of society have to struggle with every day. Let me ask you, are you familiar with any policies that are starting to explore this particular sector that you are a stakeholder in? And let me sort of explain what I mean by that, both to you and my audience. So if you look at the other areas that are focused on carbon footprint reduction, you can look at, for example, solar panels, solar wind, and there are many policies that have come online through the last, we'll say, decade that address tax credits so that it makes it easier for the buyer to actually purchase the carbon footprint reducing alternatives to what they had before. Have you seen anything like that start to percolate in any part of the United States?
You know, for our industry, if you're going to call it kind of greater agricultural technology, you know, we use the acronym AgTech. You see a lot of different types of facilities, be it grants or subsidies for the production of calories. Because ultimately, whether or not, you know, you're growing an apple, growing a stalk of corn, or growing some blueberries, ultimately these are products that are meant for consumption. From what I understand, and I'm not a regulatory or kind of tax expert on any of these kinds of things, this is very done on a localized basis. So you're going to see a very disparate types of implications of both, you know, tax implications, subsidies, all across the country. And there's not necessarily a formalized standard. And so, you know, we're operating in different markets. The inherent advantage of our technology is it can be deployed anywhere throughout the states. You know, in the future, our thoughts are to go global, but you know, we have to be cognizant of where it is that we're growing, and then again, you know, going ahead and scaling up what our production looks like. We have to ensure that there is a symmetry between what it is we're trying to get from the local municipalities that we're producing it, and trying to optimize for some of the grants, some of the facilities, some of the subsidies that we can receive as a manufacturer of American-made goods.
Yeah, and you raised something that was not the intent of my question, but you actually amplify the manufacturing side, which is just as important on policy. My question was the opportunity, which I think you've also answered in the context of your response, which is how the end user could access a carbon footprint credit for this specific type of utilization. And that, of course, would have to be done at the state level, or, for example, if many states were doing it, perhaps through a federal policy tax credit. And that's what you see with solar energy, for example, on roofs, right? Where the buyer of the solar energy shingles, or what you call them, they will get a credit over a period of time for the value of what it costs them to put it onto the home itself.
From what I understand, in terms of what the demonstrated carbon credits one would receive as a user, I don't believe that any exist. I know that we're in conversations with I think it's the Department of Water, or maybe it's Environmental or National Management of California, where we can demonstrate, if we can demonstrate the delta of water savings, or the difference between what a customer would traditionally have growing an old school kind of Americanized lawn versus replacing them with our products. We're able to actually receive a tax credit for some of those water savings. That actually has been a pretty promising opportunity for us. What we can do is we actually, through our machine learning and through some of our algorithm design, can optimize for a different set of procedures and a different set of outcomes. So while in the East Coast we don't have issues with water or with availability of trying to save water, out west it's a completely different story. So while here we might be optimizing for the biggest tomato we can grow, out there it might be for a different set of parameters that they're trying to realize for their outcomes. So thus far, haven't been able to capture any kind of carbon credits or tax savings for the end user. That's something we would love. It would only help to increase the value proposition for our users and perhaps making this product a little bit more affordable, which is something we would love to have.
And I think the water example you gave is very fascinating, and it may not be that there's the same sort of capacity issues for utilization of water that you see out west, but certainly even in our home state of New Jersey and the tri-state area, water is a valuable resource globally now. So certainly looking at it both from a cost of infrastructure to the customer, as well as preservation of gray water versus black water, they call it, or dark water, for purposes of fresh water, and that's always a concern. What you're explaining sounds really fascinating.
Yeah, no, I mean,
I'd like to thank you. Go ahead. No, please. Go ahead.
No. I mean, listen, these are all opportunities. There's just inherent positive, I say positive externalities, but only positive things can come from growing your own food, even if it's just a small percentage. I think it connects users with the land that they live on. I think you find from an educational component, we find young parents really kind of visualize and help to explain to their children that, not all food comes from a Whole Foods grocery aisle, right? To connect users with the land, to have them, really give them tools from which they can utilize and feed themselves, whether or not it's one meal a week or almost be completely self-reliant. These tools are things that I think are super important moving forward as we see that kind of general migration to food awareness, where there's been instances, with COVID, with food insecurity, just to know that you'll constantly be able to get access to as fresh and as localized as possible vegetables and herbs. All of these are things that I think are inherent to our system that we're producing. But again, I think you can come at it with a lot of different angles, independent of if your concern is about organic material or GMO or carbon savings. All of these are inherent into the system that we've built.
I think those thoughts of yours are really important and resonate for me personally, especially when it comes to that word connecting to the land, and it has many variables, as you stated. It also, I think it could be one of the variables I think of is just the ability for equality, and that connection to the land creates an equality of being part of a community that you are proud of, that you are owner in, that you have some sense of nexus to, that is important to you on many multiple levels, to your point, whether it's health, environment, quality of life, costs. So it's a really fascinating methodology that you have developed with you and your team, and my hat off to you for being such an amazing innovator in this new paradigm of the world we live in today. More companies like you are needed to be highlighted, and I want to thank you for joining our discussion today and being on our show, Zachary.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
So once again, this is Professor David Weiss from New Jersey City University's Connecting Bridges and Borders program under the Institute for Dispute Resolution and its ongoing Spotify and podcast series. And today we will continue our innovation and entrepreneurship thoughts going forward through the summer. And we look forward to the next discussion. Until then, as always, bid adieu. Take care.